I'll never forget the night I almost lost it. It was one of those moments when everything seemed to spiral out of control, and I couldn't tell if I was the only one who saw the world cracking apart, or if everyone else was just as terrified as I was. Elvis and I were in bed, surrounded by a stack of heavy, musty books. He was always reading, always searching for answers. It was like he was on a mission to unlock the secrets of the universe, and he wanted me to join him. But I just couldn't keep up. "Scylla," he said, his voice serious, "you're going to have to be pretty understanding these next few weeks, or however long it takes. I feel that I have to withdraw myself from the temptations of sex." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. But why, and why with me? He was solemn, almost like a preacher. "We have to control our desires so they don't control us. If we can control sex, then we can master all other desires." I tried to hold back my frustration, but it was building up inside me. We were in bed, and he handed me a sleeping pill, which I took, even though I didn't want to. He took his own, and then, fighting off the drowsiness, he started reading from one of his metaphysical books. I tried to stay awake, to show him I was interested, but the words swam before my eyes, and I felt myself drifting off. He noticed and woke me up. "Scylla, wake up. There's something important here, you have to listen." But I couldn't take it anymore. I burst into tears and started screaming. "I can't stand it. I don't want to hear any more. I'm sick and tired of your voice going on and on. It's driving me crazy." Elvis just stared at me, his eyes half closed from the pills. "A madwoman, a goddamn raving madwoman," he slurred. I fell to my knees beside him, crying. "No, Elvis, not a madwoman. A woman who needs to make love to and feel desired by her man. You can have your books and me too. Please don't make me beg. I really need you and want you." The room was filled with the faint sound of religious music playing on the radio. Elvis had fallen into a deep sleep, and I was left alone, feeling more alone than I ever had before. The next day I tried to act like nothing had happened, but everything had changed. Elvis was more distant, more absorbed in his spiritual quest. He was always off reading esoteric books or deep in discussion with Larry, this guy who knew more about the spiritual world than any preacher or Catholic priest. Larry and his wife, Stevie, had joined us, and I was surprised by how young and attractive they were. Larry was kind and mellow, but Stevie was sweet and quiet, and she kept to herself. The rest of us were suspicious of them, especially me. I felt threatened by Elvis's growing attachment to Larry, like it was pulling him away from me. Elvis was discovering new masters, new paths to enlightenment. He talked about Buddha, Muhammad, Moses, and others, each chosen by God to serve a purpose. He was thirsty for answers to all the fundamental questions of life, and he wanted me to join him in his search. He gave me books to read like Vera Stanley Adler's The Initiation of the World, and suggested I attend lectures by Manly P. Hall. I went, but I found the lectures difficult to understand and painful to endure. Then he got into Chero's Book of Numbers, which defined people's personality traits based on their birthdays. He added up the numbers in everyone's birthdays to see who was compatible with whom. I was terrified, hoping my number would link with his. Luckily, it did. But even with our numbers matching, the tension between us didn't ease. Elvis was struggling with his own desires, feeling guilty and confused about his natural reactions to female advances. He wanted to be faithful to me, but he was afraid he couldn't resist temptation. It was a battle he fought every day, and sometimes it felt like he was fighting me too. I wanted to share romantic moments with him, not religious ones. I tried to cuddle close, to feel the warmth of his body, but he would push me away, telling me to sit up and listen to another passage from one of his books. I tried to read along, but the words blurred on the page, and I just couldn't keep up. One night, I couldn't take it anymore. I started screaming, and Elvis just stared at me, his eyes half closed, already drifting into a deep, pill-induced sleep. I was left alone, feeling like I was losing the man I loved to something I couldn't understand, and that was just the beginning. A couple of weeks later, I was in my dressing room when Elvis came back after being out for a few hours. He knocked on my door saying, "Satnin, I want you to come downstairs for a minute. Got something I want to show you." His eyes were shining as he led me down the stairs. Then he guided me out the back door, his hands over my eyes. When he took them away, I saw the most beautiful sight, a black quarter horse with a white stocking. His name must be Domino, I said, petting the spirited 4-year-old. Whose is he? He's yours, Elvis grinned. I saw this kid riding him, asked if he wanted to sell. I could just picture you on him. You mean he's really mine? I yelled, jumping up and down, and threw my arms around Elvis. I wanted to ride Domino right away, and I mounted him. Now, wait a minute, Elvis cautioned. Don't go getting yourself hurt. He watched me with a worried look as I rode out through the pasture and up to Grandma's window. Dodger, Dodger, I shouted. Look what I got, my own horse. Isn't he beautiful? Elvis just bought him for me. Good Lord, Dodger cried. Get off that thing, Priscilla. You're gonna get yourself killed. I'm gonna whop that young un for getting you that. You got no business riding that creature. It's okay, Dodger, I can handle him. I called out, riding off happily. Domino was wild and spirited. When I rode in the late afternoons, I felt like I was in my own world. It was a wonderful release. Often, Elvis would watch me from his upstairs window. I'd call out to him, come down and ride with me. Elvis didn't ride very well back then. He only had a little experience from his films, where he didn't feel totally at ease. He was a bit scared of large animals, but he accepted my invitation and tried riding Domino. He loved it, saying, I want a horse of my own, a golden palomino. Jerry Schilling found a beautiful golden palomino named Rising Sun at a nearby stable. He was big and powerful, trained for shows. Elvis was skeptical and had Jerry test him out. Hey, it's beautiful, man, Elvis said. A great-looking horse. Jerry, you get on it and ride. Jerry had little riding experience and was scared, but he mounted Sun. Sun took off like a bullet, and Jerry barely held on. The horse seemed to be studying Elvis, as much as Elvis was studying him. He raced back, heading straight to where Elvis was standing. Hold him back, Elvis yelled. I am, Jerry shouted. Elvis was won over. Now we all got horse fever. We rode late afternoons and into the evenings, but Elvis wanted everyone to join the fun. So we started buying horses for everyone in the group, including their wives. We bought the finest saddles, blankets, halters, bits, reins, and feeding buckets. We had races and shows, and the fans loved it. One evening, shortly before Christmas in 1966, Elvis knocked on my door. Satnin, I have to talk to you, he said. We had a password, so I teased him. You have to say it first. He laughed and said, Fire Eyes, the nickname I gave him when he was angry. He had his old boyish grin, and his hands were behind his back. Sit down, Satnin, and close your eyes, he said. I did. When I opened my eyes, Elvis was on his knees, holding a small black velvet box. Satnin, he said. I opened the box to find the most beautiful diamond ring I'd ever seen. It was 3.5 carats, encircled by a row of smaller diamonds that were detachable. We're going to be married, Elvis said. You're going to be his. I told you I'd know when the time was right. Well, the time's right. He slipped the ring on my finger. I was overwhelmed. It was the most beautiful and romantic moment of my life. Elvis was in a rush to show the ring to his father and grandma. I didn't even have time to get dressed. We called my parents and invited them to spend a weekend with us in Bel Air. When they arrived, Elvis was so excited. He kept looking out the window, waiting for their car. The moment they walked in, he almost showed them the ring, but I managed to keep my hand behind my back until we were all seated. As soon as we were, he pulled my hand out and said to my parents, We just wanted to show you this. What is it? My father asked, peering at my hand. That's an engagement ring, Elvis said. Tears trembled in my mother's eyes. It's beautiful, she said softly. They were both thrilled. We emphasized the importance of keeping it a secret, asking them to maintain strict confidence. We wanted a private wedding, not a celebrity event. My parents agreed and were happy all weekend. In the 5 years I'd lived with Elvis, I rarely let my parents discuss marriage with him. They were worried about me getting hurt. Now they no longer had to worry. Colonel Parker had talked to Elvis about our relationship, and it didn't take him long to decide the time was right. It was his decision and his alone. We made plans for the wedding. I had to find a dress immediately, but it took months. I shopped every exclusive boutique, even in L.A., where I was paranoid about being recognized. Finally, I found my dress at a little out-of-the-way shop. It was simple and beautiful. I glided out of the dressing room to model it for Charlie, and when he saw me, his eyes filled with tears. "You look beautiful, Beau," he said, whispering. "He'll be so proud of you." The following February, we were driving near Horn Lake, Mississippi, and spotted a beautiful ranch, 160 acres of rolling hills with a herd of Santa Gertrudis cattle. There was a bridge over a little lake, a barn with stalls for horses, and a charming house. It was for sale. I fell in love with it, and imagined Elvis and me living there alone. I could take care of him and bring him breakfast in bed. I thought of it as a place to get away from Graceland. We were determined to buy it, even though Vernon thought it was overpriced. Elvis's movies were declining in popularity, and record sales were down, but Elvis was set on buying it. Vernon grudgingly went to the bank to borrow money, putting Graceland up as collateral. We bought the ranch, including the cattle and equipment, and named it the Circle G for Graceland. We had 18 horses, and all were transferred to the ranch, along with a staff of 9. Since the house was small, Elvis bought individual mobile homes for each family and even trucks for everyone. He spent a lot of money, but he was having fun. That spring, we spent a lot of time at the ranch, sometimes staying for 2 weeks. We had picnics, rode horses, and held skeet shooting contests. It was fun and everyone participated. Even at my tiny house, there were guests for dinner every night. Cooking for Elvis was easy, just burn whatever we were having. But there were so many others that his cousin Patsy would help me. The guys with wives would have dinner in their mobile homes and then come over for dessert and spend the evening with us. There was always a lot of jamming. Elvis, Lamar Fike, and Charlie Hodge would get together in the middle of the room, harmonizing a favorite song. When they were really going good, Elvis would yell, "Phew, hot damn," one more time. He'd sometimes spend an hour just on an ending because it had the ingredients of a masterpiece. The fun didn't last. The same fans who gathered around Graceland started turning up at the Circle. Gee, they'd climb on cars and roofs to see Elvis. We couldn't get away from them, and I dreaded driving through the gates. The dream was slowly turning into a nightmare. The wives wanted to get back to their homes, and the children wanted to return to their friends and schools. Elvis liked it when everyone was together, but he got upset when they wanted to leave. "I bought all this stuff, and everyone wants to go home," he said. He resented it. He'd given them everything. He didn't understand that most people had financial struggles and responsibilities to their families. Still, he enjoyed giving and sharing, even as his bank account was diminishing. The ranch had already cost him close to $1 million and created a serious cash flow problem. Vernon pleaded with Colonel Parker to come up with some work to divert Elvis from his spending spree. The colonel arranged for another movie, Clambake. Elvis read the script, another beach and bikini story, and hated it. Vernon convinced him he didn't have much choice. "We need the money, son," and Elvis was committed. Elvis told me he didn't want to leave the ranch. He was worried about his dad, Vernon, and the studio people trying to keep him from spending money. He said if he needed money, he'd just go to Nashville and record a few songs. It was better than making those lousy movies. Vernon and Elvis never thought about turning the ranch into a business. They had all the right stuff, tractors, feed, and even the best cattle. But Vernon said it was too expensive to keep the cattle, so Elvis sold them. If they had a business plan, they could have made the ranch work. But Vernon and Elvis were scared of business stuff. Vernon didn't like complicated tax stuff, so he just let the IRS deal with Elvis's taxes. Elvis said, "Let's just pay the taxes, Daddy. I make enough money. I'll make $1 million and I'll give them half." When our lease on the house in Los Angeles ran out, we had to find a new place. We wanted somewhere private, so we found a house in Bel Air. It was perfect, tucked away and hidden, but it didn't stay private for long. People started gathering on the hill above us, using binoculars and cameras to watch us. They even followed me one night. I was so scared and angry that I ended up in a fight with one of Elvis's fans. She called me names and I hit her. Elvis was furious when he heard about it. He went up the hill to scare her away, but the colonel told him to let it go. Elvis was really upset about the movie Clambake. He gained a lot of weight, and the studio told him to lose it fast, so he started taking diet pills. One morning, he tripped over a TV cord and hit his head. The doctor said he had a concussion, and the movie had to be delayed. The colonel used this to tell Elvis to stop reading and focus on his career. He didn't want Elvis to be distracted by all the spiritual stuff he was into. After the accident, the Colonel told Elvis and the guys to leave him alone. He said Elvis should concentrate on his work, not be a shoulder for everyone to cry on. The Colonel was especially mad at Larry, Elvis's spiritual mentor. He thought Larry was messing with Elvis's mind. Elvis promised to spend less time with Larry, and he kept his promise. The guys started being mean to Larry, and he eventually left. Elvis locked away his books and even got rid of some of them. We got engaged, and I was nervous about the wedding. My friend Joni helped me with all the formal stuff. She taught me about fancy silver and crystal. We planned a surprise wedding in Las Vegas, but it was rushed and chaotic. The Colonel didn't let some of our friends come, and it upset Elvis. The ceremony was quick, and we had to deal with reporters and photographers right away. I wished we could have had more time alone, but it was still special to be Mrs. Elvis Presley. When we got back to Palm Springs, more reporters were waiting. Elvis was so charming with the press, even though he was tired. He carried me over the threshold and sang to me. He was nervous, but he made me feel loved. We were finally together, and it was everything I had dreamed of. Elvis and I talked a lot about having kids, but we weren't planning on it right away. One day, I was lying in bed at the ranch when I felt a strange sensation in my stomach. It was something I'd never felt before. I called my friend Patsy to ask if she had felt anything weird when she found out she was pregnant. She said she just missed her period, but I was sure it was something more. I didn't tell Elvis right away. I couldn't. He noticed I was quiet and preoccupied, but I kept my thoughts to myself. I was angry at him for not wanting me to take birth control before we got married. He said it wasn't good for me and had all kinds of side effects. A week later, I told him my suspicions. I expected him to be upset, but he was over the moon. He made arrangements for me to see a doctor right away, and sat anxiously in the waiting room while I was examined. When I came out, I put my arms around him and said, "Guess what? You're going to be a daddy." He was so happy he wanted to tell everyone. His dad Vernon was stunned. Elvis teased him, saying, "You're going to be a gray-headed granddaddy." I was happy to see Elvis so excited, but I was still worried about how this would affect our marriage. I wanted to be beautiful for him, but now I'd have a big belly and swollen feet. I didn't want people to talk about how I looked. I was determined to prove that a pregnant woman didn't have to get fat. I dropped from 110 pounds to 100 pounds, and only gained 14 pounds by the time the baby was born. I snacked on apples and hard-boiled eggs, and slathered myself with cocoa butter to avoid stretch marks. A few days after I found out, we left Memphis for L.A. for Elvis's new movie, Speedway. I was still feeling mixed emotions about the pregnancy, but I tried to stay positive. Elvis noticed my mood and asked me what I wanted to do. I broke down and told him, "It's our baby. I could never live with myself if we didn't have it." He held me tightly, and we accepted our new little creation. When I first felt the baby move, I understood the joy of carrying our child. Elvis would call me every day from the studio to make sure I was okay. We decided to buy our first home in L.A. instead of leasing. I searched for a place in Beverly Hills and found a beautiful home in Trousdale Estates. It had 3 bedrooms, a guest cottage, a pool, and good security. We moved in and started preparing a room for our baby. I was so happy. Elvis's mom, who was full of Southern superstitions, gave me a lot of advice. She said I couldn't brush my hair over my head, or the baby would get tangled in the umbilical cord. She also said I shouldn't stand too long, or my legs would swell. I still kept up with my ballet, rode my motorcycle and my horse Domino, right up until the 8th month of pregnancy. Elvis thought it was amazing that I could keep up with him. Then I started hearing rumors about Elvis and Nancy Sinatra. I was sensitive and quick to cry. Elvis said I was just being oversensitive because of the pregnancy. Nancy called and said she wanted to give me a baby shower. I thought it was strange, but Elvis said she was nice and I should get to know her. Colonel said all the pictures from the shower should be given to me. It turned out to be a nice day, and I found that I liked Nancy. Just when I thought everything was going well, Elvis called me to his office at Graceland. He said, Scylla, I need some time to think. Things aren't going right. I think it would be better if we took a little break, like a trial separation. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I was 7 months pregnant. What are you saying? What did I do? I asked. He said, You didn't do anything, baby. It's not you. I'm just going through some things. I think it'd be better if we took a little break. I felt like my world was falling apart. I looked at Elvis in silence, feeling a new strength. If he excluded me at this time, then he didn't deserve me at all. I stood up and said, You've got it. Just tell me when to leave. I went into my dressing room and closed the door. I was numb. This was not the man I knew. My affection faded, my thoughts turned suspicious, and my heart ached. I didn't think Elvis really wanted to leave me. It wasn't his style. Later, I realized he had his own fears. Would his fans accept him as a father? He wasn't even sure if they had adapted to him being a husband. How loyal would they be? Within a short time, Elvis's sensitive nature brought him back to his senses. 2 days passed, and the idea of a trial separation was never mentioned again. We both acted as if nothing had been said. I wished we could truly communicate, confront our insecurities, fears, and frustrations instead of pretending they didn't exist. We probably would have been surprised at how much understanding we both really had. But his words left a sense of doubt in me. As my pregnancy progressed, we still played hard. I wanted to be included in everything. That Christmas we went to the ranch and rode horses, had snowball fights, and went on hayrides. Elvis would call out to me, How you doing, Scylla? That's my girl. How's she doing back there? I'd call back, She's doing pretty good. I'm okay. If we went horseback riding, he'd always ask, Are you sure you can do this? Did the doctor say you could? Yes, I'd answer, I can do it. I was determined not to ask for special treatment. It was only in the last month that I slowed down. Elvis would take me home, after just one movie, instead of 2 or 3. He arranged his schedule so he could be home with me at Graceland during the final month. We even practiced for the trip to the hospital. On February 1st, 1968, I woke up to a wet bed. Frightened, I called my mother, who suggested I call the doctor. He told me to go straight to the hospital. I woke Elvis and told him the big day had arrived. He asked if I was sure. When I said yes, he called Vernon and told him to notify everyone, then yelled downstairs, She's ready. Celia's going to have the baby. I calmly went to the bathroom, applied my mascara, and teased my hair. At the hospital, I asked for special permission to keep my double set of lashes. Downstairs, there was chaos. The decoy cars raced off first, Lamar and Joe waving for the fans to follow. Then we took off, but we headed for the wrong hospital. Charlie Hodge saved the day, convincing Jerry it was Baptist Memorial, not Methodist. We arrived just in time. Our daughter, Lisa Marie, was born at 5:1 that afternoon. The nurse brought her in, and I cradled her. I couldn't believe she was mine. She was so tiny, so beautiful. Elvis came in, kissed me, and was thrilled. He watched me holding her, his eyes misting with happiness. Then he took us both in his arms and held us. Nunjan, he whispered, meaning young one. Us has a little baby girl. Her nose, I whispered back. I asked if he wanted to hold her. He looked scared at first, but then he started to touch her. He played with her hands and feet in awe. I can't believe I made part of this beautiful child, he said. He was happy that Lisa had lots of silky black hair, just like he wanted. She's so perfect, he said. Even the color of her hair is right. We stayed in each other's arms, caressing our infant and each other. A young couple sharing the first pleasures of parenthood. The man in my hospital room that day was the man I loved, and will always love. He didn't have to try to be strong or sexy. He was just a man, my husband. But after the baby's birth, things changed. In my diary, I wrote that the baby was getting more beautiful each day, and Elvis was doting, insisting I keep up with my regular checkups. But I was lonely for him. He was still withdrawn. It had been 2 months, and he hadn't touched me. I asked him if anything was wrong, if he had lost his desire for me. He told me he wanted to make sure I was back to normal, that he didn't want to hurt me. That made me feel a little better. We brought Lisa to our room, and put her in the middle of the bed. She was such a good baby, and we couldn't believe she was ours. Elvis and I started getting back into our routine. We spent more time at Graceland, moving the horses back to the original stables. Elvis accepted fatherhood with joy, but my being a mother had a disquieting effect on him. I didn't understand it then, but later I learned that men who are very close to their mothers can feel this way. Elvis and I decided to get away to Hawaii. We took Lisa, her nurse, and some friends. We checked into the Ilokai Hotel, but Elvis couldn't go to the beach without attracting a crowd. We rented a house on a private beach and had a great time. Elvis and I were like two kids again, away from the pressures and the filming. We met Tom Jones, and Elvis became very fond of him. They had an instant rapport, and a friendship was born. Elvis could spot talent instantly. In Las Vegas, we regularly took in lounge acts featuring up-and-coming artists. If Elvis liked the show, he patronized the club, encouraging the entertainers to pursue their careers. Some of his favorites were Ike and Tina Turner, Gary Puckett and the Union Gap, and old-timers like Fats Domino and the Ink Spots. Elvis's 5-year contract with MGM was up in 1968, and he was free to move on to new challenges. NBC offered him his own television special, directed by Steve Binder. Elvis was nervous but excited. Steve was younger and more perceptive than the studio heads Elvis had worked with before. For the first time in years, Elvis felt creative. Steve gained Elvis's trust and let him be himself. Steve observed, took mental notes, and discovered what made Elvis comfortable. During their meetings, Steve sensed Elvis's fear of not being before a live audience in years, but he also saw Elvis come alive backstage, jamming with the musician. Each day, he grew more confident and excited about his new project. He started taking pride in his appearance again, watching his weight, following his diet, and working closely with the show's costume designer, Bill Ballou. We hadn't seen him wear the black leather suit in years. One day he said to me, "Satanan, I feel a little silly in that outfit. You think it's okay?" I reassured him, but I could see how much he cared about the special. Elvis knew this special was a big step in his career. He couldn't afford to fail. For 2 straight months, he worked harder than he ever did on his movies. It was the most important event in his life. Meanwhile, I was discovering new worlds of music: Segovia, Blood, Sweat and Tears, Tchaikovsky, Santana, and more. I wanted to share my new enthusiasms with Elvis, hoping it would bring energy to our relationship. But he was so focused on the special that our conversations were mostly about that. He was away a lot, and when we did see each other, our talks were superficial. We were both absorbed in our own pursuits, and the only thing we really had in common was our daughter, Lisa. I tried to be careful and not push him too much, knowing how much pressure he was under. In his absence, I took care of Lisa and attended dance classes, often until late at night. I was even performing in shows on weekends at colleges in the L.A. area. When the special aired, we all sat around the TV, nervous and excited. Elvis was quiet and tense, but as soon as the calls started coming in, we knew he had another triumph. If I Can Dream became his first million-selling record in years. It was a huge success, and it was a blessing for both of us. My dance classes gave him a break from my dependence, and I was creating my own world while still being there for him. After the special, Elvis dove into a recording session in Memphis. He was highly motivated and made great music with the young studio musicians. He'd be at the studio until the early morning and then come back the next day, full of energy. His voice was incredible, and his excitement was contagious. We'd listen to the songs over and over, and he'd yell, "All right, listen to that sound," or "Goddam, play it again." Colonel stayed away from this session, letting Elvis be the artist. He recorded so many songs that it took RCA a year and a half to release them all, including hits like "In the Ghetto," "Kentucky Rain," and "Suspicious Minds." Watching him sing with confidence again filled us all with pride. It was a far cry from the angry and frustrated sessions of the past. Elvis was back on the charts, and RCA couldn't complain anymore. He was eager to perform live again, to prove he hadn't lost his touch. The Colonel made a deal with the Las Vegas International for Elvis to headline there for a month, at a salary of $500,000. Vegas was the challenge he needed to show he could still captivate a live audience, but it was a major challenge. He hadn't made any real demands on his voice in years, and was locked into 2 shows a night for 28 days straight. He was anxious and worried if he could handle the strain, draw sellout crowds, and hold an audience for a full 2 hours. He wanted this new act to be accepted, feeling he had more to offer than just his rock and roll moves. The pressure was intense, especially since Vegas was the only city where he'd ever bombed, 13 years earlier. He wasn't the kind of person to say, "I'm scared." Instead, I'd see it in his actions, his legs shaking, his foot tapping. He held in his fears until he would sometimes explode. One evening, he was concerned about his hairstyle, and I suggested he look at Ricky Nelson's long, wavy hair. He got angry and stormed out of the dinner, feeling his ego was hurt. I apologized, knowing I had made a mistake. For the show at the International, Elvis pulled out all the stops. He was in top form, more trim and physically fit than ever. He handpicked the best musicians, sound and lighting technicians, costumers, and choreographers. He rehearsed for 10 days at RCA Sound Studios, and then polished the act for a full week before the opening. The pre-opening publicity was intense, and the hotel was filled with Elvis paraphernalia. We were all excited, and I made sure to find the perfect outfit for the opening night. When Elvis stepped on stage, the audience erupted in cheers. He performed old favorites and new hits, mixing fast and slow songs. I was astounded by his performance. The show was a huge success, and the International Hotel signed a 5-year contract with the Colonel for Elvis to appear twice a year at a salary of $1 million a year. Elvis's triumph in Las Vegas brought a new vitality to our marriage. He felt confident again and continued to watch his weight and work out every day. We were functioning as a team, and I loved seeing him happy and healthy. I made trips to New York to find unique accessories for him to wear on stage, and we turned our suite at the International into our home away from home. During his shows, I always sat at the same table down front, never tiring of watching him perform. Sometimes after his midnight show, we'd catch lounge acts or gamble until dawn. Other times, we'd relax backstage with other entertainers. This was the first time I was with Elvis at a high point in his career. With the renewed fame came new dangers. Offstage, Sonny and Red guarded him, but onstage, he was a walking target. One night, we were told a woman in the audience was carrying a gun and had threatened to shoot him. Elvis insisted on going on, but extra precautions were taken. The show seemed to take forever, and I was on edge the whole time, hoping nothing would happen. Because of the threats, extra security was arranged wherever Elvis appeared. Entrances through backstage, kitchens, back elevators, and side exits became routine. Elvis had his own theory about assassinations, based on the murders of Martin Luther King Jr. and Robert F. Kennedy. He told his bodyguards to get the killer before the police, if any attempt was made on his life. Sonny and Red were always on edge, and Red's reputation for acting first and asking questions later led to several assault charges against Elvis. Vernon warned him about their aggressiveness, but Elvis said, "Got him, Red. I hired you to keep the sons of bitches away from me, not get me in legal trouble." Although Elvis joked about the death threats, the fear and constant need for security heightened the pressure of nightly performing. In the beginning, when Elvis started his regular Vegas engagements, we girls visited frequently. We'd fly in over the weekend, sometimes bringing our children, spend a few days, and then return home. I walked into the living room and saw Elvis and Vernon arguing. They were talking about Colonel Parker. Elvis was frustrated. "Got him, Daddy. Call and tell him we're through. Tear up the got him contracts, and I'll pay him whatever percentage we owe him," Elvis said, his voice shaking with anger. Vernon looked worried. "Listen, son, are you sure you want to do this?" "Got him right I am. I hate what I'm doing and I'm got him bored," Elvis replied, his face red with frustration. He stormed out the front door and didn't come back that night or the next few days. We were all confused. Elvis never went anywhere alone, not even without a bodyguard. He didn't even know his own phone number or carry any cash. How was he going to get around? Jerry Schilling told me later that Elvis caught a commercial plane to Washington. D.C. He had a bad cold and took penicillin, which made him react badly. He decided to fly to L.A. first and called Jerry to meet him at LAX with a doctor. After getting treated, Elvis rested for 2 days in L.A. and then continued his journey to D.C. with Jerry and a $500 check that Jerry had arranged to have cashed. On the flight, Elvis met a young soldier returning from Vietnam. The soldier told him his whole life story. When the plane landed, Elvis gave the soldier the $500, saying, "Yeah, but he needs it worse than I do, shilling." Later, Elvis asked the stewardess for a pen and some paper. He wasn't much of a letter writer, but he wrote a letter to President Nixon. He wanted to help kids get off drugs. The letter was full of mistakes, but Elvis was passionate. He explained how he could assist the youth of today. Jerry arranged for a limo to pick them up at the airport and drive them to the White House. It was 6:30 a.m., and Elvis was dressed in black, wearing a black cape, sunglasses, a large gold international belt, and a cane. He looked like Dracula, Jerry said. His face was a bit swollen, and Jerry was worried his appearance would cause trouble. When Elvis explained who he was and that he had a message for the president, the guard promised to give the letter to Nixon by 9 that morning. Elvis then asked Jerry to set up a meeting with John Finlater, the deputy narcotics director in Washington. Elvis really wanted to help kids get off street drugs. He also hoped to get a federal narcotics badge for himself. The next few days were a blur. Elvis was determined to make a difference, but I couldn't help feeling worried. His sudden actions and changes were scary. I missed the old Elvis, the one who was always there for me and Lisa. But I knew he was struggling, and I hoped his trip to D.C. would help him find some peace. Elvis and I found ourselves living in a world where our roles were constantly shifting. Our marriage became more of a part-time arrangement. He wanted the freedom to come and go as he pleased, and he did. But when he was home, he was the most attentive and loving father and husband. Still, the responsibility of parenting Lisa largely fell on me. I realized I needed to spend more time with her when she refused to leave her nurse for a family portrait. It was a wake-up call. I started taking Lisa to parks and swimming lessons, trying to build a stronger bond with her. Despite the challenges, I tried to keep our family traditions alive. I took Lisa to visit Elvis in Vegas for her birthdays, and we had these huge parties with everything a toddler could want. I encouraged Elvis to join in family activities, but his absence was often the norm. When he was home, he tried to make it special, even though sometimes he had to be firm with Lisa, like when she colored on a velvet couch with crayons. The house on Hillcrest Drive became too public, and photographers would even hide in our backyard. One day, Elvis and I were sunbathing by the pool, and I leaned over to kiss him. He whispered, "What's that noise?" It was a photographer. Elvis chased him off with some colorful language. The house was getting too small and too public, so we started looking for a new place. We found a beautiful house in Holmby Hills, a quiet area with lots of space and privacy. I was excited to decorate it, and it became my passion. I wanted everything to be just right for Elvis, and I loved the process of choosing furniture and colors. It gave me something to focus on beyond our relationship issues. Around this time, I also started practicing karate. It was something Elvis loved, and I thought it would be a way to connect with him. I began with private lessons, and later trained with Mike Stone and Chuck Norris. Karate wasn't just about physical strength. It was a philosophy that taught me about discipline and confidence. I found a new circle of friends and a sense of self that I hadn't known before. Through karate, I learned to express my emotions and stand up for myself. I stopped relying on makeup and fancy clothes for confidence. I felt a transformation, a newfound strength that helped me navigate the complex world of our family. Even though Elvis and I had our ups and downs, I was growing in ways I never thought possible. And in the end, that's what mattered most.